but welcome everyone to our session. My name is Kerry Englert. I'm your discussant today, your chair, and just so pleased to be here with you. And just a word of gratitude to the CREA organizers and family for the opportunity to come together. And I just always value this conference so much as a place where we can come together and exchange ideas, and really a safe space where we can challenge each other and give constructive feedback and learn and grow. So I'm really happy to be here, and so excited to learn from our presenters today. As I read through each of the presentation descriptions in the program, I was struck by the depth that each of the projects have gone into in terms of describing their work with their students across different education contexts. So I'm just really excited to learn. We have a total of 4 presentations today that are scheduled that address creating more equitable, engaging and relevant content and context for students from different groups. And again, just excited to learn. And I think all of the 4 sessions that we have were recorded. So I'm hoping that Jeff can hear me and that we can start the videos. I'm just gonna message him really quickly. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to our session about a needs assessment survey that this team is working on to support the Native American schools in North Dakota. And I'm joined today by Lucy Fredericks, who's the director of the Office of Indian and Multicultural Education at the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction, and also Lynn Bopp, who is an Education Improvement Association at REL Central. And my name is Kerry Englert. I'm a consultant at REL Central.
Hello, everyone.
And the Regional Education Lab serves the Central Region, and we serve these states, providing research assistance and also disseminating research. And we're a federally funded lab. And the goals of the session today are really to present a tool for identifying Native American student needs, and then to discuss the development of that student needs assessment survey. And I'm going to turn it over to Lucy Fredericks to talk about the tool.
Thank you, Kerry, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our session today. I wanted to talk a little bit about what a needs assessment process looks like in general. This figure represents a typical needs assessment cycle, which follows the process used by the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction for these needs assessments. Starting at the top box, DPI has carefully considered the content of the surveys and then administers them yearly to schools that support Native American students in North Dakota, which includes public and BIE, or Bureau of Indian Education schools. And then we analyze the data, and based on those data, we create and implement a plan to support schools in a targeted way. We have followed the cyclical process through several iterations of the survey to work on continuous improvement. As we followed this cycle, it has also organically allowed for the ongoing refine and rethink of the survey. We're going to dive into that top box a little more. How do we know what to survey? Stakeholder engagement. So we got to that recognition of worthiness through ongoing connections with our stakeholders. I think the unique aspect of this project is how the work evolved around the idea that the survey really needed to reflect the community's priorities. The main focus was placing the school community at the center of the project, and the researchers facilitated the discussions that allowed the community to dictate the survey content through focus groups and interviews. This ongoing dialogue allowed for a better understanding of the community's priorities, concerns, and ideas that they wanted to communicate with the state. The key to this was what the state's existing positive relationships with the Native American communities. So initially, we started with the development of teacher and administrator surveys, which have been published. However, in conversations with Rel Central, and myself, we felt that we were missing a key voice, and that was the students. We currently have 2 surveys, a teacher survey and an administrator survey. The 3 versions of the needs assessment survey, and today we will focus on the student version survey. The surveys were developed with an advisory group that was composed of Native American educators from across the state of North Dakota. The advisory group provided suggestions for topics for all versions of the survey. The topics for the teacher and administrator surveys are shown on this slide. We reviewed literature and other existing relevant surveys to develop questions related to these topics. The advisory group reviewed the survey questions before the survey was sent to districts and schools. And now I will turn it over to Lynn.
I'll talk a little bit about how we went about developing the student survey. So as Lucy mentioned, after administering the teacher and administrator surveys for a few years, NDDPI recognized that they were missing the student voice in identifying those needs. So we followed a similar process in developing the student survey, but added a step that involved conducting focus groups with students to get their perspectives on the types of questions that should be included in the student survey that we were working on. So an advisory council was convened with 6 educators from across the state of North Dakota. They work with the Native students and identified 4 topics across areas they wanted to dive deeper into. They wanted to learn about student perception of their own culture and the degree to which they felt the school supported and fostered their cultural identities. They wanted to learn about activities provided by the schools to help connect students to school as well as to cultural activities, athletics, cultural events, clubs, etc. They wanted to learn how much attendance was impacted by such things as transportation challenges, health problems, and other family issues. And also about how school climate affects students. Do they feel safe? Do they feel engaged? Do they feel protected from or supported with bullying problems? And so using those 4 topic areas identified by the advisory council to guide us, we created question protocols for conducting student focus groups. For example, to better understand how students perceive school support of Native students' cultural identity, we developed these prompts for discussion. How do your teachers include Native culture in their teaching and classroom? Can you think of a time when one of your teachers has done a really good job including Native culture? Can you describe a time when your school included the tribal community, your elders or family members in an event or activity or in daily activities at the school? What did that look like and how did it make you feel? These open-ended questions provided the opportunity for rich conversations in our focus groups. And our sample included 5 schools. So we had 3 urban and 2 rural schools. 2 of those were middle schools, 2 were high schools, and 1 was an elementary school. And we had approximately 8 to 10 students per group. And in preparing and conducting the focus group sessions, we found that it's important to do these things first. Do your homework to understand the context of the session and the situation you're walking into. What's been going on in the community recently? Has there been an upsetting event? What's happening at the school? Is there new leadership? Are there lots of snow days or finals coming up? Are there local tribal events happening? Things like that. Do your best to ascertain group dynamics. Who's in the room? Is there a teacher? Is there a counselor, an administrator, someone who might encourage participation, or maybe someone who might accidentally inhibit student participation? Consider providing alternative opportunities for students to participate, because not everyone likes to speak in front of a group. Some people aren't comfortable talking in front of their peers or strangers. So provide some alternate options like notepads, sticky notes, whiteboards, anything to get them communicating their thoughts and feelings and feel safe about it. We all know how valuable wait time can be, just not to the extent that they start to squirm or get uncomfortable. And one-on-one communication can be really helpful too. You might find that there's a student in the group who will talk to you if you sit right next to them, or if you make yourself available to them after the session, or another trusted adult that they feel comfortable talking to. It was such an honor to be invited into schools to talk to students. The students we talked to were so insightful and articulate. It was really inspiring. And I think some of the most powerful statements across the work we've done came from the students themselves. And some of what they told us were things that all students want. They wanted to feel safe in school. They wanted to feel connected to their school community. They valued personal connections with teachers and with principals. They also provided insight into what they wanted included in their textbooks and lessons, and how many teachers really did try to include Native history and perspective. And Kerry, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. So all of the focus group feedback that we got was so important. It was so insightful. And this, again, the students were just, it really touched my heart. They were just so engaged, and it was so clear what they wanted adults to know about their school experience. So we took that feedback that we got and we really started to develop some draft questions. We tried to really frame the questions in a positive manner. So it wasn't just thinking about deficits, but thinking about what was available to them. And trying to make the questions general enough so if a student was Native, they could answer the questions, or if a student wasn't Native, they could still answer those questions and provide information. So what I'm showing you right now is an example of a question about how schools support the development of Native students' cultural identity. And many of the activities that we listed came from the students themselves, talking about what their teachers provided for them or what they really wanted to see more of in their school. And once we drafted those questions, again, we went back to our amazing advisory council and we asked them to review the draft survey that we had and to really consider questions that they wanted to add or delete. Did the questions provide key and ample opportunities for students to voice their thoughts about school? Did we have enough so that the kids could provide feedback? We also asked about the rating scale and if it was appropriate for middle and high school students. As you can imagine, as we went through the survey development process, the questions were changing all the time, and sometimes the rating scales didn't always keep up with those changes. So the advisory council was able to kind of pull back and give us some constructive feedback. And then finally, were the questions written at an appropriate level for middle and high school students? And they really helped us think about the words and making it appropriate for that age group. And this is where we ended up. These are the content areas in the survey, including student attendance, bullying, school support of cultural identity, school climate, and then expectations and support beyond high school. Whatever the students had in mind for life after high school was the school supporting that. And really the goal, I think, for the whole team was always keeping an eye on what information would be really important for Lucy and her team to know about as they move forward with supporting schools. And then finally, lessons learned. Just in conclusion, we really thought about response scales, again, how Lucy and her team would use the data, how we could capitalize on opportunities in the survey. So we asked a lot of open-ended questions and also provide students with options for, in that other category, so they could describe what other things they wanted their teachers and principals to know. And then really focusing deeply on how students were interpreting the questions, including focusing on language, wording, and reading level. And those were really informed by the focus groups. It was just such a critical part of the process. And we just want to thank you for attending our session, and we're looking forward very much to the Q&A that will be live. Thank you. Thanks so much, Lynn and Lucy. And I think that was the only video we had. And so I'm just going to move us right into some of the live presentations. I think Scott and Dawn, if you might be willing to present next, that would be great. They're going to talk about Following Their Voices, a study of a province-wide initiative to change teacher practice and meet Indigenous students' learning needs.
Terrific. Thank you, Kerry. We did upload a video, or it was uploaded, but we can certainly go with a live presentation if you prefer. Whatever. Is the video not available?
Thank you so much. Let me double check. Jeff, I think you said that maybe there wasn't a video for this, or we were having some technology issues.
We're teachers after all, we can adjust. I'm a recovering
Thanks so
band
much,
teacher.
Scott.
I'm a recovering band teacher. There's not much that can happen that we haven't dealt with sometime.
So appreciate it. Maybe if you have your slide deck handy, I don't want to put you on the spot though either.
No, I got it. And that's terrific, because then my colleague Dawn will be able to join us as well. So that's terrific. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you also for the introduction and the first session. My colleague Dawn Wallin and I had the opportunity to conduct research in the north of Saskatchewan here in Canada, it's our pleasure to share some of the information with you. The first thing that we want to do is acknowledge that both Dawn and I live and work in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan at the University of Saskatchewan, which is in the Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis people. And we acknowledge, both of us are also farm kids. We acknowledge our connection to the land. We acknowledge our connection to each other and to the people who have always lived on this land. In research previous to this one, I observed that in Saskatchewan at least, and that's true probably across Canada as well, in Saskatchewan at least, despite all of the kinds of things we've done in service of trying to improve outcomes for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students in the K-12 system, we really haven't made much progress. That's interesting. I didn't actually do anything. Okay, well, Following the Voices is a program that was devised by the, I wonder why that's going on its own. Well, things are strange today. And it has some key indicators. And the key indicators are that schools must acknowledge and care for and believe in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students and their cultures, have high expectations that Métis, Inuit, and First Nation students are self-determining, can participate, and can achieve, and create a secure, well-managed learning environment, engage in teaching and learning interactions that are responsive to student interests and needs, use a range of strategies to promote accelerated growth, and use evidence from Inuit, First Nation, and Métis student outcomes to identify strategic actions that promote accelerated growth. These are important pieces, and schools have to apply to get into the program. Well, isn't this fun? Dawn, I'm going to let you go with this slide. But you need to unmute.
If any of you had a chance, my name is not on the presentation and the picture of me is not me. So I really am the presenter. Anyway, FDB has key elements. It comes from a train the trainer model. So there's a gradual release of the model to a strategic leadership team that usually consists of some of the administrators, a facilitator in a classroom, and then working with collaborative groups of teachers in the classrooms themselves. Scott, so the school-based facilitator will work with teachers over a 3-year cycle, and they actually institute an observational model with a lot of discourse and dialogue to provide feedback to each other on their teaching strategies, on differentiated instruction, on culturally appropriate practice that's going on in the classroom. And there's a critical learning cycle then where teachers are observed once per cycle. There are 4 cycles annually throughout the year. And then those observations are discussed in terms of the indicators that Scott was talking about earlier. And that then teachers set individual goals for improved practice. They work collaboratively as teacher groups to co-construct group goals that we intend and hope will be connected to both school goals and district goals, of course, further on. And then they participate in classroom walkthroughs of each other's work to, get rid of the silos in classrooms and to collectively work towards the goal. They have huddle meetings, generally weekly, to discuss their progress. And then the school-based facilitator of the initiative shadow coaches individual teachers along the way. So it's a real mechanism of support for change. They also then implement a number of tools that has been used to sort of help move that process forward and to evaluate the effectiveness of the model itself. And you can see the tools that are listed there. So we were able to work with 11 schools that were in the second year of their implementation of a 4-year process. And we were asked to sort of look at two things. Recognizing that it was only second year, we were actually asked to look at how the schools were able to maintain fidelity to the FTV process itself, and then initial possibilities of the success for outcomes and indicators of the work. So we were able to speak with teachers, students, the school leadership teams, and caregivers in the community using an appreciative inquiry approach that was really a strength-based approach, so that we could see how well the process was going through an appreciative lens. So you can see that that FTV in the province already had some data collected. We were able to look at existing data. We had conversation circles with all of the groups mentioned above that had site-specific questions added to it. And then each individual school was able to get a report. And then Scott and I also conducted a meta-analysis across all 11 schools. You can see there some limitations common in the data. Access to parents and elders is still an issue. Hesitancy about outsiders coming in to conduct research in local communities is always there. A couple of the schools didn't really have admin really behind the initiative, which was a problem. And then data challenges, either insufficient or unavailable in the schools, and then the differing sophistication levels of people in schools to understand and use data appropriately.
3 themes emerged from the research that we were able to conduct. And by the way, the photos that are in the shots are from the actual schools as we were traveling around to them. One of them, it was a collective responsibility, and schools are most successful when schools take collective responsibility, particular teachers, and when the layers of goals are integrated with each other. So the district, the school, personal goals, sometimes the provincial goal as well. All of those needed to be linked for the school to feel like they were making progress and be successful. And all of them needed also to have specific measurable outcomes. The staff takes collective responsibility for change. We saw this in a couple of schools where the staff said that this project actually made them feel accountable both to each other and for each other to make sure that they improve outcomes for students. Focus on pedagogy and cultural responsivity. It was important to have both. Elders and traditional knowledge keepers were explicitly connected, and that's when schools were most successful, and that the whole school community knew what FTV was, following their voices, and why it was in the school. Schools were less successful when there were multiple layers of goals that were unconnected, or there was no measurement plan, which was sadly in many schools, is that they didn't have a measurement plan. And if we asked them to articulate what is success, I'm not sure that they could articulate that. When staff looks outside or expends energy critiquing data rather than responding to them, that's also an issue. In some cases, we would help them go through the perception surveys, for example, and the staff would get hung up on critiquing the items in the survey rather than talking about and owning the responsibility of the findings. And then if communication was inconsistent, incomplete, or non-existent, that was also a recipe for less success. Dawn, over to you.
Sure. So sustainability of the project itself was most successful, of course, when staff found the ways to create time, space, and expectation for the changes. when facilitators were consistent and well supported. Some schools, the facilitators were pulled in multiple different directions. The ones that really were able to focus on their time and energy in the project were clearly making it more sustainable. When professional learning was deemed to be worthy and not driven by outsiders or the province, when it was really localized to communities in the ways that they needed it, when collaborative capacity was built locally at the district and regionally and provincially, so that there was this sense that there was a connected professional network. And then, of course, when culture was an integral part of pedagogy and content, we often found that the teachers were more willing to differentiate their instruction than necessarily provide cultural opportunities within that differentiation. It was less successful, of course, when they didn't look at it as a collective responsibility and it was somebody else's problem to bring it into their classroom. When professional pressure and support for engagement was absent, particularly when administrators weren't utilizing that opportunity to offer pressure and support. And when courageous conversations on racialized issues and cultural responsibility were absent. There were still a few places where those conversations, particularly at the administrative level, it pitted administrators in some very contentious issues when they were trying to deal with difficult conversations, but they didn't know if they had support from the district in making that happen. And so there was some desires to avoid conflict, essentially. And then when persons new to the role, a lot of these communities, there's a lot of annual turnover in staff. And so keeping the momentum going with new people and making sure they were on the same page as others who were further along was also an issue. And yeah, PD sometimes had a lot of moving parts. And so people were not necessarily knowing how or why it all connected to the local spaces.
When leadership, as Dawn said earlier, when school-based leaders take explicit and vocal responsibility for providing that pressure and support, schools were more successful. It should be noted that the classroom observations that take place actually are not done by school administrators. They're done by colleagues, but the school-based leaders did need to take responsibility. And in some schools, well, in one school, Dawn and I actually never met the vice principal. So, and we were in the school for about 6 days. So in that particular school, things weren't as successful as we might want them to be because the administrators were abdicating responsibility for it. If division level leaders or district level leaders are seen as supportive and active, that's important as well. We found that when Indigenous peoples lead the effort, so in schools that had Indigenous administrators or facilitators or elders knowledge keepers and when they were actively involved in the work that was being done in a variety of ways, whether that's interpreting some of the things or just advocating for certain instructional strategies and things, the school was more successful than when that was not happening. The leadership piece is a key one. So the school-based leaders like principal, vice principal is one thing, but there are other people who are leaders in schools, as we all know. And when leadership is viewed as collective, and the school takes collective and collaborative responsibility for improving outcomes for students, we saw schools do very well. And then the regular connection with elders and traditional knowledge keepers was critical to the success of schools. When they were doing this regularly, the schools, the elders and traditional knowledge keepers actually felt a part of the school, we found, and also the students found them as being part of the school as well. And there was a really good synergy there that took place. And like we said, it's critical that the school-based leaders need to be involved. And when they were absent, it showed. If teachers were not held accountable to engage and participate or to use the following their voices discursive strategies regularly, schools were less successful. And again, the communication, we all know how important communication is in schools.
So some final recommendations. We simply recommended that FTV as an initiative was on its way, but there was necessary to improve and explore some different strategies for communicating its value. There was definitely more need to be more intentional in the inclusion of elders and traditional knowledge keepers, whether that was on the leadership teams, whether it was in classrooms or community events, and to help those school leadership teams build their data literacy knowledge and to enhance the skill sets of the teachers and the staffs for facilitating those data conversations that could help inform future practice.
And we will wrap up today with it. We felt also like the previous group, we felt it was an honor to be able to speak with the elders and children and youth and teachers and the other people in the various schools that we visited during the initiative. We talked to north of 300 students and I don't remember 100 and something staff members and parents and all kinds of other people as well. And we were just so grateful for the opportunity to visit. And this photo in the background was one that was from one of the communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott and Don. This was such a beautiful presentation and so meaningful. Again, appreciate your willingness to kind of jump in and present live. Really, many thanks. And so our next presenter is going to be Amy Nelson Christensen and her colleagues, and they're going to speak about the evaluation of the manhood development course for Black and Latino male youth. And I should note, Amy, we don't have access to your video, so hoping that you might be willing to also present live, if that's okay.
I actually have a recording that I'm going to share right now. So I don't know what happened, but we had a recording that we submitted as well, but I have it ready to go. So I'll just present it here. All right. Welcome to our presentation titled Supporting Black and Latino Male Achievement in Schools. In this presentation, we will provide an overview of an evaluation we conducted on behalf of Milwaukee Public Schools and the Department of Black and Latino Male Achievement to measure the impact of their Manhood Development Academy as part of their strategic systems change work for equity to better serve Black and Latino male youth in their schools. The facilitators of this presentation are Amy Nelson Christensen, Maria Mendez, and Jesus Ramos. And other partners who collaborated on this project include Rebecca Anderson and Paul Moga and David Castillo from the Department of Black and Latino Male Achievement. Some background about the work of the department. In 2008, the Campaign for Black Male Achievement launched a national campaign to work with cities and school districts across the country to address disparities in achievement for Black male youth. Milwaukee became a city partner in 2016, and the campaign consulted with the district in gathering a team to tackle the issue of achievement for Black and Latino boys. The idea of setting up an office such as the Department of Black and Latino Male Achievement, or BLMA as we like to call it, is founded on the idea of targeted universalism, which is an approach to systems change that assumes that when you target supports and systemic change around a marginalized group, the system actually improves in a way that benefits everyone. The department's goal was then to engage in systems change targeting Black and Latino male youth to better meet their needs, with the understanding that improving the conditions for learning for Black and Latino male youth would benefit their peers as well. In addition to Milwaukee Public Schools, other districts that employ a similar framework include the Office of African American Male Achievement at Oakland Unified School District, the Office of Black Male Student Achievement in Minneapolis Public Schools, and the Expanded Success Initiative, or ESI, in New York Public Schools. These three offices were consulted as BLMA set up their strategic plan. I will now turn it over to Maria to talk about the department.
Milwaukee Public Schools, MPS, is a mid-sized urban school district that serves over 70,000 students. During the 2018-19 school year, the district reported serving a population that was almost 90% students of color, including Black, Latinx, Asian American, and Native American students. During the 2016-17 school year, the district examined their graduation rates disaggregated by race and found that only 1 in 2, or almost 50% of Black and Latino males were graduating from their high schools. After a series of high school listening sessions, BLMA was established. In the fall of 2017, BLMA began to develop a pilot course known as the Manhood Development Academy, MDA, which focused on the social, emotional, and academic competencies of Black and Latino male youth. In the spring of 2018, departmental staff identified 4 pilot schools that would serve as the first schools in the district to hold the course. 2 high schools and 2 middle schools were identified using a selective process focused on leadership capacity. The Manhood Development course was created based on student feedback and review of research on racial and ethnic identity programming for youth. It is an elective offered to Black and Latino boys enrolled at the selected piloted schools. The curriculum was developed by licensed teachers and meets Common Core standards in the areas of language arts and social studies. These classes are taught by licensed teachers who identify as male and either Black, Latino, or both. Students meet 2 times per week for 50 minutes to explore issues of race, ethnicity, and masculinity through the 12 guiding principles. This study aims to provide an example of how intervention with a framework of supports for Black and Latino boys can be provided to foster a supportive learning environment through the affirmation of identity to inspire belonging and efficacy for school. Research questions were explored as a part of the evaluation for the 2019-20 school year to examine the relationship between some of the identity-affirming aspects of the MDA curriculum and its intended impact. In partnership with the department, the following questions were investigated. Is there a significant difference in ratings of school belonging, self-efficacy, and identity between boys enrolled in MDA compared to boys of similar backgrounds not enrolled in MDA? Can the relationship between school belonging, self-efficacy, and identity predict subsequent GPA and school attendance for students who participated in the study? And now Jesus will discuss the methods.
During the 2019-2020 school year, 3 schools, 1 middle school and 2 high schools implemented the MDA for a second year in a row. The schools implementing MDA primarily serve students who identified as Black or Latinx, and over 85% of the student population were considered economically disadvantaged. For the 2019-2020 school year, there were 145 students enrolled in the MDA across all 3 participating schools. Students who participated in the MDA identified as Black and/or Latino and male and were between the ages of 15 and 17, which are grades 7 through 11. After removing incomplete responses, the overall participation rate in the survey for students enrolled in the MDA was 45%, or 65 students. Students for the comparison group were randomly selected from a list of students at each school using stratified random sampling with a random number generator. Students on the list were of similar background as the students enrolled in MDA, e.g. identified as Black or Latino male and enrolled in the grades 7 through 11. The overall participation rate for the comparison group was 9%, or 13 students. Due to limitations as a result of school closures in March 2020, there was a limited participation when the survey was conducted in the spring of 2020. All measures are scales with high reliability. During the pilot implementation in 2018-2019 school year, There were issues with student attendance, which prevented students from fully participating in a pre-post survey for their beliefs and experiences. Furthermore, socially desirable responding possibly inflated the pre-survey scores, leading to less valid data. Anticipating attendance issues and accounting for socially desirable responding, for the 2019-2020 school year, a post-reflective survey method was used to allow students to share their authentic beliefs related to their experience with the program, and also to prevent inflated pre-survey ratings. Towards the end of the third quarter, about halfway through the second semester, students were surveyed during a regular MDA session. The survey required them to respond to each item twice with what they believed before participation in the MDA, and then what they believe now or after participating in the course. This ensured that the ratings reflected students' beliefs about their experiences and not their beliefs about what was most socially desirable. Figure 1 provides an example of how the questions were laid out in the survey. For the comparison group that was surveyed during the comparison group was surveyed during a study hall period and were asked to reflect on their school experiences regarding what they believed at the beginning of the school year, i.e. before, and what they believed after or now. Paired t-tests were run to look at the differences in the pre-post ratings or before and after ratings on the survey. There were significant differences in students' responses from before to after for all items on the identity measure. For example, I feel a strong attachment towards my own ethnic group or culture was significantly different. Similarly, questions like, how much do you matter to others at the school? Based on these results, it appears that students who participated in the MDA believed more strongly in their connectedness to the school, their efficacy for learning, and their connectedness to their racial and/or ethnic group after participation when compared to students in the comparison group who received school-based services as usual. Although a relationship between these variables and subsequent GPA and attendance was not found to be significant, it is assumed that this was a result of the small sample size, considering that previous studies have found a relationship between similar variables. Thus, it appears that the MDA had a positive impact on the affect and cognition and cognitive engagement of Black and Latino boys who participated in the course. These beliefs are vital building blocks to achievement that are often ignored and factors that precede behavioral engagement, such as attendance. By focusing on ensuring that Black and Latino boys feel affirmed and efficacious in learning, they are supported in their ability to achieve. Now, Dr. Nelson Christensen will review the discussion and the implications for practice.
This research reinforces the idea that schools need to do a better job in meeting the needs of Black and Latino male youth in schools. And this starts with improving the conditions for learning and ensuring that Black and Latino boys have what they need from their schools in order to be successful. This means schools must understand all the necessary components of achievement and embrace the need for socially supportive learning environments. This study also highlights the necessary supports that schools can provide for students in middle and high school that affirm their identity in the context of achievement. Lastly, this study is part of a larger movement to ensure that schools are safe spaces both physically and emotionally for learning, and the required systems change needed in order for that to become a reality.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson Christensen. Really so appreciate this presentation. It's inspiring, both of the presentations and the first one as well. I'm just struck by the wealth of methods, the findings, and also looking forward to having some Q&A. And so I think we have about, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, I think we have about 20 minutes left for Q&A. And so I'm pretty casual. If folks want to unmute themselves to ask questions, that's great. Also, if you want to type any questions into the chat, we would love to see those as well. And I will just stop talking for a few seconds to see what questions pop up. And also apologies, we haven't had rain at my house in about 2 months, and we're having a thunderstorm, so it's a little loud on my end. So I'm going to jump in with the first question while we're waiting for others to chime in. I'm wondering, for across the presentations, if any of you have any insights or experience, anything that's reflected in your projects about ways that you were able to engage your community members that were particularly effective, or what lessons you've learned around that others could benefit from in their own evaluation practices.
We found that meeting people in person and holding talking circles is how we handled it. We found very effective, and in many of the communities, particularly in northern Saskatchewan and probably most remote communities in general, providing food and fellowship and those kinds of things, we found to be very effective. People come because there's an opportunity to have a cup of coffee and a snack as well as a visit, and that was really positive. And spending time informally with people as well was a real big plus. I often sat with whoever I could find to sit with and just have a chat, and that was really positive as well.
One of the things that we did in our research team was set up regular meetings with the Department of Black and Latino Male Achievement. We felt that was really important for us, as we, even though, we only implemented the survey every spring, in terms of interpretation of the results, it was really important for us to understand the challenges of implementing a program like the Manhood Development Academy. Anybody who has tried to implement change within a school district, you could probably understand that it's a very challenging and nuanced work. And so we really, as a team, in order to best make sure that the results were used in a way that could be supportive of the department, we needed to have regular check-ins to understand any challenges that we needed to be aware of as we were communicating the results. And so, for example, a lot of the results were communicated using infographics so that they could then share it out with their community partners. We felt very strongly the community connection that BLMA has. If we created this report that was very technical and hard to digest, that we weren't doing them any good in creating a very big report that they couldn't really share out with their community. And so working with the department and figuring out how best to communicate the impact both internally and externally, that was really important as we checked in. One of the things that we would really love to do moving forward is figure out, and the pandemic and the nature of schools right now is really hard, but we'd love to do some member checking with students and share the results of the survey with them and have them tell us whether they think the results are accurate or why they think the results are true. We know that programs like Manhood Development Academy and other similar programs that focus on fostering strong connections and racial identity support school connectedness, but we have less data around how that happens, the mechanism. And I think having student feedback and input around why certain components of the program made a difference for them in their belongingness or efficacy and even identity would be really great things to add to future programming, and doing that in collaboration with the students.
Thank you so much to both of you. And Lucy, I'm wondering if there's anything that you want to share from the work in North Dakota, just around engaging students, engaging the community, that you felt worked particularly well.
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. Yeah, so I think, as in our presentation, we mentioned about stakeholder engagement. And I think it really helps too at the state level, for my position to really kind of already have those existing relationships with the tribal nations in North Dakota, especially being from Standing Rock, and being an enrolled member and knowing a lot of the tribal leaders, I think is real important also. And then also with the schools, really being able to kind of have that connection with, me being a previous administrator in a Native American school, and just kind of having that experience and really building those relationships and making sure that their voices are heard and that we get their input is real important. I think having that also at the top level with your state superintendent being able to be supportive and really encouraging that, tribal consultations and Indian Ed Advisory Committee meetings, and just really making sure that, that they are all included and that their voices are heard is real important.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Totally, absolutely agree. Just in terms of working in North Dakota, how important that was. And there was a question for Scott and Dawn specifically, but I think maybe it applies to all of the papers. And the question is, how do you address the distrust of researchers that you met during your study? So I think there is a lot of distrust of researchers in the Native community and in communities of color as well. So interested in hearing from all the panelists about how you worked through that.
Mm-hmm. So I'll jump in here on behalf of Scott and I. For the most part, it was on centering relationality rather than the research, right? And the research was relationality. We work in a province in Canada where really still people are only 3 or 4 distances removed. So we were very intentional about ensuring that our research team also included Indigenous researchers as well as research assistants, some of whom had connections to communities, some of whom had their languages, because we had about 3 or 4 different Indigenous languages represented in those communities as well. And so being intentional about place and space and not focusing on our roles as formal researchers from an institution, but on the relationships we could create with the local people when we went there. And so we were part of a co-constructed process and made that very clear from the get-go. Also, just ensuring that when we went with tobacco, we went with food, we went with gifts. We were following local protocols prior to engaging with those communities, and that was really centered in the research as part of how and what we did and who we went about doing it with. So that was really clear to decenter the positionality of formalized research, especially in communities where research has kind of been what they call a dirty word, for lack of a better term, and it has been research on rather than research with. So also the intent to use appreciative inquiry that helps to decolonize, that helps to be strengths-based, was also very intentional. So people knew that we were focusing on the strengths of their communities, not to pick and prod. And then using it also as an educative space. We talked about the fact that some of the folks in those communities were not sophisticated as data consumers or analyzers or any of those kinds of things, but not expecting that, right? So using our roles to be helpful in terms of providing an educative arm, not just taking data away, but contributing back to the community. And then they all knew that those local reports were coming back to them so that they could improve that local process and continue engagement, not only in the initiative, but Scott in particular now has been going back and working with the school teams in many of those schools to continue on the work. So it was a relationship that's still existing. It didn't just come and go. Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much, Dawn. I think that's really, really helpful to understand. And I don't know, Amy and your team or Lucy, do you feel like there was some similar mistrust, and were there specific ways that you worked to kind of move past that?
So what I can share is I think we were in a unique position because I used to be an employee of the district and supported the establishment of the department. And so I was able to build some relational capital through the work I had done to help support the establishment of the office. And so before I had left the district, I had also worked with the team of the department to create the metrics that we were going to use to measure the impact of the department. And when I had left to take on an academic position outside of the district, I was able to stay on to support. And so having been an embedded researcher for 2 years before taking on the role as an external evaluator really helped to build that capital. But I think ongoing to have those check-in meetings on a regular basis to understand how things were going, but then also understand the needs, helped to build further relational capital so that we were making sure that the work we were doing was aligned with the work of the department and not just measuring something that may have evolved. And so we did try to use a developmental approach in our evaluation. Which was kind of why initially we had designed a pre-post survey, but then based on what we learned, we designed a post-reflective survey because they were concerned with getting started right away. And when do we start the pre-survey? And just through consultation with the district, we felt like it was much easier on them to manage everything logistically that they had to manage if we could figure out something more innovative and creative. And so building that trust, I think, requires us to be flexible and innovative in the work we do as researchers to make sure that we're building something that works for them and that we're not just coming in and saying, well, you must do it a certain way, otherwise it doesn't have strong methodology. Being willing to be creative so that we can meet a need and still yield strong data is really important. And also serving as an ally, because when you're doing academic work or work focused on achievement, there's a lot of pressure, or even work with Black and Latino boys, there's a lot of pressure to focus on discipline. There's a lot of pressure to focus on proving that you're improving suspension rates. And they did not want to fall into that narrative with our boys. And so serving as an ally for them and being creative on how we could communicate the impact of the work also was supportive for them, because we were a partner in helping them push back against that narrative so they could focus on systems change.
And Lucy, I don't know if you had anything to add. I think Dr. Nelson Christensen, what you were saying about having that existing relationship was really huge for our work in North Dakota, certainly, in that Lucy, you were such a familiar face to a lot of the educators, a lot of the students when we went into schools, that it really, that connection was so important. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna go back up to in the chat because there was a question. And I think it was to the Dr. Nelson Christensen, to your team. While the curriculum was developed by licensed teachers and meets Common Core standards in language and language arts and social studies, was the material taught to students by Black and/or Latino teachers?
Hi, everyone. This is Maria speaking from the BLMA team. Paul, our coordinator, just answered this question as well, but we do have Black teachers and Afro-Latino teachers that teach the course. But in addition to, the teachers teaching the course, they also engage in regular meetings with the department and just kind of making sure that they feel supported as well. And then we also, based off of results of the study, we try to incorporate the feedback that we hear. So for example, based on the pilot study in 2018 and 19, The department found that it was and believed that it was important to bolster the social emotional components of MDA. So it was important that more coaching and training of the teachers related to this culturally responsive instruction and social emotional supports were provided. So along with, the identity that they have to create the space for these students, there's also ongoing conversations with the teachers to ensure that they're supported.
I don't know, Paul, if you had anything you wanted to add.
Not really. Maria kind of covered it all.
And Paul was one of the teachers who helped to create the curriculum. Just so I can brag a little bit about Paul. He is used to be a culture responsive teacher leader for Milwaukee Public Schools. BLMA is very lucky to have him and his expertise in designing the curriculum. And he's a high school English teacher by trade, and was based on what he learned from the students, designed an excellent and amazing curriculum that the students absolutely love.
Wow, thank you. I guess what I could add though, based on what Maria said, we did fall on restorative practices as a strategy for the courses. And so it's embedded into the curriculum that the students will learn how to conduct restorative practices circles. And that will just really become a part of not only just conversations to repair harm and things of that nature, but also as a teaching tool. So they deliver material in circle as well. And so that has proven to be very effective for us.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I just have to sort of step back for a second, because I'm reminded when we originally, all of us as panelists, when we wrote our CREA proposals, it feels like about 500 years ago that we did that, even though it's been, I don't know, maybe a year and a half. But so much has happened in that space of time, both in terms of racial and social justice, as well as the pandemic. If any of the panelists can talk about how the past year and a half has impacted interest in your programs, if it's changed any of the content, how you think about the content of your program, if it's changed your dissemination strategies, anything along those lines, anything that's changed between now and when you originally wrote your proposal for the conference.
Well, Paul and Maria and Jesus, feel free to weigh in. I think the biggest thing for us was realizing how inequitable the system had been prior to the pandemic of the resources provided to Black and Latino male youth for wellness. Self-love is one of the two we mentioned in our presentation, the 12 guiding principles. Self-care and self-love was a really important part of the work. And in navigating and pivoting during the pandemic, how inequitable and how the system really isn't set up to support Black and Latino male youth and their needs became even more apparent than it had been before. And so I think that the results of our survey became even more pressing to understand how we created a space for belonging and identity support in a virtual setting, and how needed it was during a time of a very challenging time.
What I could add is that from my point of view as a coordinator, it was almost a blessing in disguise. That's inappropriate to say, but it forced our instructors to become more technologically astute, which was a win for us, that they were able to convey the things that we did in person pretty effectively virtually. I mean, of course, there are bunch of things that could have gone better, but that was one thing that went well. But we really did see, like, just in terms of access to technology, internet, what are wraparound services that schools offer to Black and Latino male students and their families. Like, there's definitely a gap there. And what we're probably going to see now that we're back full in person right now is unfortunately, we didn't learn much from that process, and we're going back to business as usual, which didn't serve those students well pre-pandemic. And so now students are struggling again. We're getting a lot of feedback from young men saying that, they're just trying to suspend me again. And so we will have some interesting conversations this year, and hopefully some data to support the fact that what we're doing could counteract some of that if it was implemented in a larger way.
Thank you so much, Paul. And Lucy, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about North Dakota and how maybe the pandemic has impacted our needs assessment surveys, or kind of renewed interest in those surveys.
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. So yeah, we kind of had similar issues, I guess, due to the pandemic. Really found some inequities in some of the access to technology, and especially with our tribal nations and some of our schools within the reservations in North Dakota. But it also was a good thing that we were able to address those gaps and be able to assist and support schools that needed additional technology, and to be able to support them in providing training and PD, and looking at the different platforms that were being used. And so that was a good thing. The other thing that happened in North Dakota also that is kind of related is our legislature passed a bill. It's Senate Bill 2304 that requires all elementary, secondary, public and non-public schools to include Native American curriculum in their schools. And so that was something that I think was very well needed and supported. And so at the state level here, we are really supporting schools with resources that could help them meet Senate Bill 2304. And with the teachingofourElders.org website that we had developed and started this initiative back in the spring of 2015, where we brought elders together from the tribal nations in North Dakota and created aligned lesson plans, K-12 lesson plans in all content areas for teachers to utilize as a framework to embed into their classroom curriculum. And so along with that, we provide PD and training also for schools. And a lot of schools had already been implementing Native American culture, but there also are a lot of small rural schools that really would need that support and those resources. So that's kind of where we're at. That started this school year, August of this year. And so we're going to be kind of evaluating and tracking that to see what the schools are using to meet that requirement.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I'm so excited to just see how that work unfolds for North Dakota. It's just so exciting and so innovative. So thank you for sharing that. Dawn, I don't know if you wanted to share anything, you or Scott, about your project just in relation to what's been happening over the last year and a half.
The data were collected pre-pandemic, and the commitment we always make when we go to these communities is that we will not report something to somebody else until we've come back and shared it with you and talked about, did we get it right? And we found that was another thing that we did to sort of alleviate some of the concern or the hesitancy, but also to build relationship. And so we were able to get the visits in as well before things ground to a halt. Since then, well, in Saskatchewan anyways, basically the whole province was shut down for months. At our university, we were banned, the campus was closed. So I wasn't in my office from March of of a year and a half ago until about the second week of July this year. So, you know, we obviously then we were also not allowed to do work in the field. So we you know, cultivate the relationships. We keep in touch with folks the best we can, and we continue to do the work that we do. And you know, I've been making contacts with others or with people who are leading the work at the provincial level to try to rejig, reform, suggest, alter, you know, alter whatever needs to be done based on the findings. The Ministry of Education in Saskatchewan also took responsibility to make changes to the program based on our recommendations. So that's a pretty big move for the government to actually make some deliberate evidence-informed changes. So they've implemented almost all of the recommendations that Dawn and I made, and that for us is a pretty big positive, which is helping me in particular. My continued, Dawn has several other responsibilities. She's an associate dean and a variety of other things, but I have continued work in many of those communities as well as expanded to other ones. And that the relationship we build in those communities and has really made a big difference in our ability to continue growing and improving. The government also mandated treaty education for all students K to 12. So that happened several years ago, but it's still a work in progress, let's say. But I agree also with Paul that the pandemic was a bit of a blessing in disguise, in the sense that we got people moved along in a much shorter period of time than would ever have been possible before, in terms of understanding how to communicate, interact with others, use some of the technologies that have been there for a long time but not really used well. And so that was a big move for us as well. Well,
again, many thanks to our presenters on their wonderful work. It's very, very inspiring. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all at the rest of the conference. Have a wonderful rest of your day.